On today's World Insight, first time one-on-one, face-to-face meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Joe Biden. Could they meet eye to eye? The chances of working towards stable Russia-U.S. relations. And lives no longer in the clutches of extreme poverty. An unflinching closer look at how people manage to do that in a riverside village in Yunnan province. That eye-opener.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The first face-to-face meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin will take place next month in Geneva. It's reported the leaders will discuss the full range of pressing issues, including fighting the pandemic as the two countries seek to restore predictability and stability to U.S.-Russia relations. The high-stakes meeting comes nearly 3 years after President Putin met the U.S. President then, Donald Trump, in Helsinki. How different will this meeting be with the previous ones, and whether they're going to address some of the real pressing issues? How are their meetings likely to reflect about the latest geopolitical changes in the world? Let's loop in our panelists. For more on U.S.-Russia ties, we are joined in Washington, D.C., Anton Fedashian, Professor of History at American University, and also Ambassador William Courtney, Adjunct Senior Fellow at the RAND Cooperation, who's former Special Assistant to U.S. President for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. So tell me more about why is this meeting? It seems all of a sudden, June the 16th. Ambassador Courtney.
There's quite a lot of interest in the United States in U.S.-Russian relations these days. Relations have become more tense, particularly with the Russian military buildup around Ukraine, now more recently the Belarus crisis. Mm-hmm. There's a feeling among a lot of people that having a high level of discussion is helpful to reduce the risk of miscommunication or misunderstanding, even if one doesn't expect a lot to come out of this. To make a comparison, in 1985, President Reagan and President Gorbachev met in Geneva, Switzerland. They didn't make much progress, but they developed a little mutual confidence, and they began to understand each other's positions better. I don't know that this summit meeting will be quite as positive as the Reagan-Gorbachev meeting, but it probably will help clear the air a bit.
I see. Professor Fedashian, we understand back in April, the Biden administration already trying to approach Moscow for a meeting. Of course, that's even at the same time when sanctions against the Russian officials are being planned, and also some kinds of not necessarily friendly ambience between the two countries were still in the cooking. So now, are things getting better? How do you see this June the 16th?
Well, I think it's too early to determine whether they are going to get better. The fact that there's going to be a meeting, I think, is a breakthrough, and it's long overdue. And that in itself is a very positive development, because despite the multiple disagreements on a whole range of issues that exist between Moscow and Washington, even during the Cold War, as Ambassador Courtney just mentioned, at the height of the Cold War in the middle of the 1980s, coming out of the Reagan, Andropov, and Chernenko years, Gorbachev and Reagan decided to meet and simply to start talking to each other. So this looks like a repetition of that kind of attempt. Listen, it's always better to talk and to keep in touch, especially with people you do not see eye to eye with. That is the whole purpose of diplomacy. Diplomacy doesn't exist there to sort of to keep friends talking to each other. It exists to take the edges off the rough corners and sometimes to avoid full conflicts. And so in general, I'm very positive about the fact that the meeting will happen, but the details we'll just have to wait and see.
Right. It's interesting, at least to me, listening to both of you gentlemen, using analogy of the Cold War era, particularly almost at the end of the Cold War era, to describe what is going on and the logic between for the meetings between the two presidents, Russia and the United States. Why is that? To me, it's very interesting because the circumstances are very different now, I would say, Professor Fedashian.
Well, I think part of it is the geography of things. Geneva, again, the middle of Europe, neutral space for the beginning of the rebuilding of the relationship. But I think there's also, of course, a sense of hope on both sides, by the way, that out of the darkness of the current misunderstanding, a light will eventually emerge. I just want to caution.
So you think this is a misunderstanding? There has been misunderstanding, right? That seems to be an interesting word.
No, I'd say this is a bit stronger than a misunderstanding. There are profound disagreements about some very basic things on both sides. And we can go down the list. Ukraine, the Middle East, there are many issues, election meddling and so on. So this is more than misunderstandings. The issue here is that the only way out of this is not posturing and not talking to each other and sanctioning each other. It really is talking to each other and working through the differences. And God knows, maybe this will be the beginning of another spiral out of the current standoff.
How much hope do you pin on that, Ambassador Courtney? And my earlier question as well, why is that analogy about almost the end of the Cold War, the last president of USSR's meeting with the former US president relevant here?
So the Cold War period that's most relevant right now is before Gorbachev came to power. It's the Brezhnev and Andropov-Chernenko period, when the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, was secretly deploying SS-20 missiles against Europe and Japan, shot down the Korean Airlines passenger plane, was putting pressure on Poland to declare martial law to subdue the Solidarity Free Trade Union. Those are the kind of relations we have now. So this summit may be helpful to some extent in clearing the air, but unless some concrete problems can begin to be solved, there will not be political support to sustain a rich dialogue with Moscow. Thus far, Moscow and Washington have not really been able to solve any problems. Ukraine is being, as Professor Fedashian pointed out, that's the first problem, that's the biggest problem. But now we have the election interference, cyber attacks, solar winds, the Russian support for what Lukashenko just did with the Ryanair flight. We don't see Moscow wanting to try to find solutions to any of these problems. And so this is why we have so much support in the US Congress for more sanctions on Russia.
On the other hand, Ambassador Courtney, you may have noticed that many of the allegations you just illustrated actually has been denied by the Russian side once they were raised by the US side. The issue is whether the US and Russia will be able to communicate on some of the accusations you just suggested. And the Russians have their list of accusations against the US as well. And meanwhile, whether the US will play a role toward the Europe, its earlier role of being the guardian, or a different role given the changes of the US role in the world today. Ambassador Courtney.
So you had asked about the role of Washington politics. The reason I'm bringing Europe into this is that this is not just a matter of Washington politics. This is a matter of politics throughout Europe and the United States. A lot of frustration with Russia's actions. In order to make progress, some of those problems have to begin to be solved.
Professor Fedashian, as an observer of both sides, both Russia and the US, now you're based in the US, but you're originally coming from Russia. Tell me more about your sense of how the two countries are trying to carve themselves out about its own role now in a very dramatically changing world as we speak. What they are having on the agenda very much have to do with what their ambitions are and how they see each other and how they see themselves. So I know this is a very big topic, but I hope you will be able to shed some light as well on that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Look, the Biden administration has made it clear that it sees itself as bringing America back into the global driver's seat. The question is whether there's only one driver's seat at this point in history or not. I've said this before on your show, and I'll repeat it again. We're all living through a very important stage in global history where the West, which has really determined the pulse and the tune of the planet's history for the past, give or take, 400 years, 500 ever since the age of discovery, is now facing non-Western powers that have the wherewithal, China first and foremost, of course, of them, that have the wherewithal to actually claim an important role, a co-leading role, let's put it that way, in articulating the rules of the game. So this is a massive historical change. It's a tectonic shift, and as with tectonic shifts, a lot of furniture gets moved and broken, and that's what we're seeing all over the place. The Biden administration seems to think that it can put the United States back in charge. And I'll be honest with you, for all of the nobility of the cause, I don't think that's going to be very easy to do. From the Russian side, there's a lot of talk about some kind of, global plan on Putin's part. I don't really see one. Russia is happy to be a continental power, regional power, keeping in mind that Eurasia is a pretty big continent. But the Russians aren't trying to export an ideology to the rest of the world the way that the Soviet Union certainly did, with some successes and some failures. So in that sense, the two countries are very different in the scale of the influence that they are looking for. But for the Russians, there is a perimeter around their border where they think they ought to have a voice in what happens, be it NATO expansion, be it geo-economic issues. And that was the source of the disagreement over Ukraine. And that's how I would answer your question.
Very interesting. Ambassador Courtney, you also want to shed some light on that?
So let me just make the point that while there are a lot of differences between Russia and the United States is not trying to keep Russia down. The United States would like for Russia to be a cooperative great power. A good example is in the negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal. Russia, China, several European countries, and the United States worked together to conclude that deal. That's how great powers can be most effective. Russia is a great power, but as Professor Fedyashin points out, it will only be a regional power if it tries to go it alone too much. Russia is overextended now, needs to try to find ways to cooperate more with other great powers to accomplish big purposes. One of those, of course, is climate change. Now, Russia is really feeling the effects of climate change, particularly up in the Arctic, which is warming faster than the rest of the Earth. So former Secretary of State John Kerry is eager to engage Russia in that. This would be one area for progress. But one way or another, if Russia is going to sustain itself as a great power, it needs to find a way to do that in a more cooperative manner.
Another question I really want to ask all of you, both of you, is the elephant in the room, right? The changes that you all beautifully illustrated. For example, China and the United States, or the role of China in the world, and the shifting geopolitics that's going on. How is, China, Russia, U.S., China relations that is being the elephant in the room? How do you see the two sides, Washington and Moscow, likely to play that card toward one another? That is a fascinating question to me, at least in this part of the world. Professor Fedyashin.
I think the Russians are actually very conscious of what many scholars have called the strategic triangle of the United States, China, and Russia. The Russians are clearly willing to work with the Chinese right now, and there's a whole number of reasons for this, including geographical ones, their neighbors. And the Russians understand that they are in a very good position right now because they've essentially reversed what Kissinger and Nixon had done in the early 1970s. The triangle that makes up this strategic triad seems to have two sides more or less balancing against a third, that being the United States. And I think it's constantly in the back of Putin's mind that there is, beyond the specifics, there is the bigger overarching geostrategic equation, this triangle, and that the Russians are right now the balancers. And if they incline their weight towards the Chinese, that cup on the scale will win. If they incline their weight towards the Americans, then it will go the other way. Listen, there's a reason that it's been Kissinger who has been most outspokenly critical of American policy towards Russia, beginning with the Obama administration and through the Trump administration, because he's seeing the work that he had done in the 70s so painstakingly being unraveled. The U.S. has been pushing Russia into the hands of China from the American perspective.
Interesting. Ambassador Courtney, you experienced that in person, I guess, at that period of time. What do you make of now, that elephant in the room, the role of China and their relationship individually with China?
So there are some people in Washington who think that the U.S. should try to pull Russia away from China. And that's not realistic. Russia, because of its increased isolation from the West and from Europe, has moved toward China, and their closer relations will continue. Now, most of the Russian economy is in the western part of Russia, and the cultural ties are much stronger to Europe than to China. So when there's an opportunity, when Russia's misbehavior, if you will, diminishes and allows closer relations with Europe, we think we'll see Russia pull back toward Europe to a greater extent. But Russia and China are neighbors, so to be expected that they'll cooperate. If one makes a comparison, the Canadian economy relative to the U.S. economy is about the same proportion as the Russian economy to the Chinese economy. But the Canadians trade about 10 times more with the United States than Russia does with China. So there's a lot of potential for Russia and China to improve their economic cooperation, which it should. But most of the issues that the U.S. is dealing with regarding China are really unrelated to Russia. There are economic issues, there are issues about the Western Pacific. Russia is really in a different situation. So I think we'll see Russia and China continue to cooperate, but we should not expect that the balance of power is going to change in a dramatic way.
Professor Fedashin, respond.
Listen, I actually agree with what Ambassador Courtney says. I think he's right on the ball. I think the cooperation will continue, and the Russians are simply going to behave like all rational actors behave in a fast-changing system. They are going to pick the best partner for a given policy that they can. And that's pretty much been Putin's policy, especially the last 10 years. Putin's not an ideological thinker. He's very much a strategic and tactical thinker, and he chooses what he believes is best in Russia's interests.
Ambassador Courtney, further on that, we heard today that the U.S. State Department, some senior officials suggest that the age of engagement with China is over, quote, and it is the age of competition. Now, that is not news necessarily, but there seems to be ever more clearer statement coming out of Washington about its nature of relations with China. So if that is the case, the question really is not necessarily where Russia will go, but whether the U.S. could afford to have competitors/foes, rivals, with both China and Russia, both at the same time? That is an interesting question. Ambassador Courtney.
So it's useful to remember that Xi Jinping has seen the relationship between China and the United States is pretty much different than the way Putin has seen the Russian relationship with the United States. China and the United States cooperate in so many areas in the economic domain, from iPhones being produced in China, many other things. Our ports in the West Coast of the United States are receiving ships from China constantly. So the fundamental, if you will, basis for U.S.-Chinese relations has a strong commercial component, and that's likely to continue because both economies are dynamic. There are frictions, of course, in the East and South China Sea, some other, Taiwan recently has become a problem, and then with Xinjiang, Hong Kong, those are geopolitical issues as well. But the relationship between China and the United States is so much stronger than the relationship between the United States and Russia, because we have very little trade between the United States and Russia. We do have a common interest in our large nuclear arsenals and trying to maintain those and keep those safe and secure, if you will, reduce nuclear threats. But beyond that, the U.S. and Russia just don't have the mechanisms for cooperation that China and the U.S. have.
Now, looking forward to what might be on the agenda, what do you think could be the items that both sides, or Moscow and Washington, put on the final plan?
Jen, first of all, just record that we don't know yet exactly what's going to be on the discussion list. That hasn't been released. But I think that the following items will be. First of all, a very serious discussion of the future of Afghanistan, because now that the United States and NATO have failed to bring order and peace and stability and democracy to that country, the regional powers are going to have to step in. And the United States is going to have to ask itself some very serious questions about the extent to which it remains in Afghanistan, because the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians will then have to try to work with the Taliban. That's number one. Number two, the question of the Iran nuclear deal. Number three, the question of North Korea. Number four, the issue of Ukraine, which is going to be one of the more difficult issues, but not impossible issues to solve. Next, cybercrime, which is a huge question, and the Russians have repeatedly invited the United States to start talking about this seriously, and have so far been met with a refusal. We'll see if there are any changes, even behind closed doors. And last but not least, probably the environment. Although that is, in my opinion, it existentially the most important, but also the most sort of vague issue.
Got it. Ambassador Courtney, your list.
So it's useful to separate some of the small issues from the grand issues. Both Russia and the United States are concerned that the size of their embassies now have been cut down. The personnel have been cut down to such low numbers that they can't do their normal business. And this has been as a result of various mutual reductions of personnel because of various differences. I think Russia and the United States will try to find a way to begin restoring more normal sizes of diplomatic representations. It would be useful, as Gorbachev and Reagan did in 1985, to find a way to increase people-to-people contacts, cultural exchanges, educational exchanges, things like that. Those also tend to be an enduring foundation for relations between countries and commercial relations. There are a lot of U.S. companies operating in Russia in non-sanctioned sectors, and they're doing quite well, doing good business. So we'd like to see if we can continue that, because again, commercial relations sometimes endure even as political relations go up and down. Then on the major issues, Ukraine will be by far number one, because the biggest sanctions that the West has on Russia related to the Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine, which still continues. As Professor Fidashin points out, the cyber attacks, election interference, that's clearly going to be a top issue. And then more recently, because of what's going on in Belarus, one imagines that that will become an issue as well. So there are quite a few issues to be discussed. And again, let me go back to the point that in order for relations to get better, some problems need to be solved. And it's not yet clear which ones of those might be.
All right. I want to thank both of you for giving us a lot of insights about the latest development and the future trends. Of course, the U.S. and Russia finally be able to work on the nuclear threat, on the arsenals. Earlier, the extension of the agreement that was applauded by the rest of the world. But for the next stage, what's likely to happen, we'll have to wait and see. Thank you so much, Ambassador William Courtney, Professor Anton Fidashin. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight. Coming up, lives no longer in the clutches of extreme poverty. An unflinching closer look at how people managed to do that in a riverside village in Yunnan province, southwest part of China. That eye-opener next. Restless waters of no return. Lives out of extreme poverty. My trip to the New River in southwest China's Yunnan, meeting ethnic families, celebrating authentic cultures, watching real life unfold before my eyes, hearing deep insights. They say one never steps into the same river twice. Everyone I met there is determined not to fall back into poverty, but find new ways to embrace a new life. Farewell Poverty, a World Insight special. Welcome back, World Insight with me, Tian Wei. China has gone the extra mile in stamping out extreme poverty. In fact, the country has already announced by the end of 2020, it is already stamping out extreme poverty in the country. Now, half a year later, in order to take a closer look at how the situation really is on the ground, I visited a mountaintop village alongside the Nujiang River in China's southwestern Yunnan province. You know, most of the villagers there belong to the new ethnic minority. Look at their wardrobe, extremely beautiful and wonderful. There I met WULIN, his family, his friends. They're all proud of a unique musical legacy, which is Yunnan's intangible cultural heritage. And by the way, not only about the music, they also tell me about their stories of running a family motel, which is having great business. Let's take a look. The New River, running swiftly through rugged mountain canyons. Great range of elevation and latitude make it a most awesome scenic spot, an ecologically diverse region. But it was also one of the most difficult to reach places. Until recently, when a new highway made access easier. But there are still stretches of the mountain that are a reminder how much one should cherish the moment of arrival. The mountains in Nujiang are absolutely gorgeous. Now with better roads being built, more tourists are coming in. I came with deep gratitude for whomever built the road, so I could meet Yu WULIN and his family. Yu of the new ethnic group is a mountaintop villager. Tall, talkative, hospitable, speaking great Mandarin, who runs the most successful motel in the region, one of the most respected local entrepreneurs. He showed me around his home and motel, briefing me how to be a good host and introducing me to his family and friends.
这两个是谁呀？
我大姐家的。
哦，大姐家的。
是大姐家的，这个是表弟家的。
啊，那我们这两个小漂亮的姑娘是不是？这一家太好了，是吧？几岁？7岁。7岁，你呢？6岁。
But the thing that he is most proud of is his native new music culture. He asked his master and fellow music buddies to welcome me.
So this is going to be a new nationality small concert. Master knows about 80 different kinds of rhythms, how to do it. He is really the one in the village. And these two are his apprentices. They are going to show us some very special skills of how to use the instrument.
Surely.
Now there is another special performance. It's about him will play his instrument and he does vice versa. Now let's take a look. What a wonderful instrument.
这个打比亚是我们怒族的传统乐器。
The bia is the traditional instrument for our new people. In our dialect, it's called dabir.
鼻儿有个鼻儿。
打比儿。
The new ethnic minority group only has spoken language and our culture passed down generation by generation. The bia was among the first batch to be included in the National Intangible Cultural Heritage List from our new people. You can play the bia solely or dance to it. I heard from the elders that in the past, there were 100 ways to perform, but as some residents passed away, now we only know about 80 ways. Uncle Bo is an intangible heritage inheritor in our province and hopes to become one on the national level.
他下一步也就是国家级的。
传奇了 ，legend legendary figure.
He can perform in over 80 different ways. No one exceeds him in our village. We use the local instrument the bia to perform all our music. Since we live up in the mountains, we call on each other by singing when we go to work in the fields. So we perform this song.
就先弹这一首邀约劳作歌。
Okay.
That's great. Okay.
鸽子来来来，来不来来来，鸽子打叉啦喽哎，来不打叉啦喽哎。菜鸡到了哎啦哎，热桶到了哎啦哎，菜鸡到了，菜鸡到了哎啦哎。热桶到了，热桶到了，哎啦哎，菜鸡到了，哎啦哎，热桶到了，哎啦哎。刚刚我们唱的时候，生活在大山里面，相互邀约劳作出去的时候。
The song we performed before was basically to tell everyone it's time to work in the fields, and the expressions come from our daily life. There are songs for lovers to express their affection towards each other.
相互男女表达爱情的都很多。
那这样吧
So can you do a short performance of a song like that? A love song?
哦得得，哦得得，米勒玛啊，哦得得，哦得得，加勒玛啊，哦得得，哦得得，米 你来面孔靠开开，靠开开，这里这口靠开开，靠开开。哦得得，哦得得，你来马上哦得得，哦得得。这个情歌弹上来是只要对得上你。
We can sing on and on if the love songs can respond to each other.
这位大哥脸上已经露出了非常幸福的表情。
I can tell. So who were you thinking when you're performing this song?
He remembered when he was falling in love in the good old
也
days.
是属于我们这个省级的非遗民歌。
It's a new ethnic song style that's also an intangible cultural heritage in our province. We performed it in different occasions. I'm the inheritor of this song style. It's passed down from the older generation. When we slept next to our grandma and grandpa, they told us stories and played songs for us. But we never learned. Only those who learn to sing from a young age still have the memories, so we learn from them, and they were willing to teach.
他们也很愿意的无偿的在教我们。除了这个，我们还有。
We also have a traditional harmonica.
So a lot of people are coming to the village, right?
Yes.
How many people can you host in your motel?
我们家呢现在总的有30多个房间。
Our house has a total of over 30 rooms that can accommodate 60 or 70 people. We now have nearly 30 guest houses in the whole village. If my house is full, I will introduce guests in another house. If there are a lot of people coming to eat today, our neighbors will come over to help. We support each other, and the guest houses are family run. During the Labor Day holiday, nearly 3,000 people came into our village every day. I was the first to start the business from the old house we talked about just now. Our guests increased each year, and after the roads were built, especially after the beautiful Nujiang Highway was built all the way to Lushui City, more people have started to do tourism services.
做旅游服务从业的人就感觉到人越来越多，一年比一年多。
咱们是觉得能够大家对真正的文化。
Do you think they come here because they are interested in traditional culture, or are they just visiting?
它是一个是为了看山看水，也是一个目的，各有所爱来这里的呢。但是
Of course, people are attracted to our great scenery, and people all have different things they want to see and do here. But I believe when tourism is combined with traditional culture, it can develop in more meaningful ways. We were the earliest group to live in this village. A lot of tourists are curious about the culture of ethnic minorities. They want to see us perform and get to know us.
最主要还是好多人还是喜欢我们这个传统的这些东西。
保护自己的文化对您来说肯定也。
I'm sure it means a lot to you to protect your own culture,
但是
isn't
我
it?
从以前呢，小的时候没有意识到这些，没有刻意的学，但是到了一个
Yes, when I was younger, I didn't realize how important it was, so I didn't make efforts to learn. Once I realized that as old residents passed away, a lot of tradition were gone. So the responsibility is on inheritors like me to learn from respected artists and pass it down to the younger generation.
的同时要传授给下一代。
咱们此前这个地方。
So your village was very poor earlier, wasn't it?
是呀，我们本身就是很别的。这2年呢，通过政府的对我们这些扶持力度大增，特别是对我们。
Yes, it was really poor. In the past 2 years, the government has supported us a lot. When we were young, we lived in wooden
这个
houses.
传统的这个老木屋老木。
刚才和阿妈和阿叔在这里。
Yeah, the room, the old room we were at with your aunt and uncle.
但是为什么我现在为什么还保留着？因为最主要是为了把这个传统的东西保留下来。
The houses still have bamboo walls. The reason I still keep them is to show tourists the original state of places we used to live. Our old houses can protect us from wind and sunburn. And when it rained, our roofs were blown away. We didn't have enough to eat. We didn't have clothes to wear.
国家 对我们扶持力度很大，特别刚才说对我们这些小少民族较少。
In recent years, the government gave ethnic minority groups a lot of support. We have built houses, there is electricity, and roads have been renovated. When we were young, we had to fetch water from the river. Now we don't need to do that at all. We feel happy. But the little ones are happier. They don't need to struggle with poverty. We have witnessed the support from our country, and we are enjoying all the positive outcome.
是我们这一代是借鉴我们这些对国家对我们扶持的这些好的政策，我们是真正的享受到这些政策好的东西的人。
但是也有人有不同的想法，他们说，哎呀，你看，这些。
I understand, but some people might think differently. They think you have moved to new houses from old ones and meet with tourists every day, so your culture is not authentic anymore. So how would you respond to them?
您怎么看这些人的
这个呢，
讲法？
可能说呢，只有呢，实际上也是一个好的，也是一个必须一个。
In fact, this is a good thing. People living in the mountains need to connect with modern life. It's a turning point. I just mentioned that in the past we didn't have enough to eat, but now we have governmental support. Some of the elders could feel uncomfortable at first to leave the place they are familiar with, to leave the bonfire. But that will slowly change, especially for our children. With the progress of modern civilization, it will get better.
So do you wish that they live in the old houses or apartments?
Of course, the apartments. We will have roofs over them that we didn't have when we were young.
Will they still remember the traditional culture then?
So we have the responsibility to teach them.
So what you're trying to say is you don't need to live in broken houses in order to preserve the culture, right?
You don't have to live in broken houses or near the bonfire to learn the culture. As long as you have the desire to teach and learn, you can do it anywhere.
When you sang the love songs earlier, I saw a lot of pride and confidence on your faces.
因为以前说过，就是我们弄出来打比亚是就是。
There's a saying in our new culture, you don't express love with your mouth, you only need to play the bia. Our generation doesn't have the exact feelings, but for people at Uncle Bo's age, they sing when they want to express affection. Men would touch the ends of women's dresses when performing a true love song.
Then let's have Uncle Bo himself show this tactic to us. Okay? Uncle Bo, please. So can you teach me how to dance? The singing and partying was so much fun, as one could tell. That dance has to go with it. I was so eager to mingle, though a bit clumsy, but it does not matter to my host, as it's all about joy and hope, something they would love to share with everyone they meet.
吹起到了哎啦哎，热头到了哎啦哎，吹起到了吹起到了哎啦哎，热头到了热头到了哎啦哎，吹起到了哎啦哎，热头到了哎啦哎。
好，
嘿嘿。
What a happy family. The family of WULIN, coming from the southwestern part of China, Yunnan province. New ethnic group. Their family music concert. I'm so glad I was part of that. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching.